Welcome back to Libib's YouTube channel. I'm your host, Kaylin, and welcome back. Today we are sitting down and doing an interview with Phillip, a library director in Mississippi, and I was able to also meet him at the ARSL conference in Wichita, Kansas. I saw that he was doing a session over AI and libraries, and this little light bulb went boop off the top of my head, and I was like, it would be so cool. I had Grammarly AI write me 10 questions to ask Phillip, and I did an AI-generated interview. So let's check out what Phillip has to say about these answers.
What are some ways that AI can be used in library settings?
Okay, AI in library settings, it's sort of a complicated because obviously there are some worries around AI. But the ways I found it to be most helpful is that AI does a lot of what we already do, but it does it automatically. I use it in things, I don't want to call them menial tasks, but they're the paper pushing part of the side, especially as a library director. I have to write policy, I have to write press releases, I have to write letters. I'm not proud to say that I use AI sometimes to write letters, but I'll give a couple of quick examples. I have found that in policy writing, librarians tend to ask each other very often, you know, hey, do you have a sample for this type of policy that I can borrow to help craft mine, et cetera, et cetera. We borrow all the time. Well, I discovered that AI has done that. It's already, especially the large language models like ChatGPT and Google Bard have already pulled all that kind of information because it's all on the internet. Not all on the internet, but the stuff that is on the internet. And I can ask it, hey, I can tell it, craft most recent one I did was a photography and videography in the library policy. And I was able to get one. Now I had to tell it to redo a few things, but it wrote me a really great policy that I didn't have to start from scratch on. The same thing is true about writing press releases. I tell it the event, I give it all the details and tell it to write a press release, and it does it. Now, there are things you have to tinker it, you have to proofread it, you need to make sure that all the information is accurate. I love when I get it to write a press release and it quotes me for something I never said. Sometimes I just read it and go, yeah, I'd have probably said that, and it'll work. Or letters, for example, I've recently had to go through a round of hiring, and I absolutely hate writing rejection letters, and I needed a better one than the one I was using, and so I had an AI write one for me, and then I tinkered it just a little bit, and now I have what I think is a really compassionate but direct rejection letter for hiring.
How can AI help with cataloging and organizing library materials?
That's a fantastic question that I'm already in conversations with a couple of ILSs to figure out. Actually, they happened because of this conference. I'm going to sit down and talk with Cameron Charbonnet from Biblionics, and one of the sponsors of our conference, and we're going to figure out, because he's already started to tinker with AI a little bit, and we're going to get together and try to figure out what can AI do to make this process better. But right now I don't have a solid answer for that one.
Are there any ethical considerations to keep in mind when using AI in libraries?
So there are absolutely some concerns to be had around ethical concerns in using AI. For example, we just had a judge say that pieces of art created with AI cannot be copyrighted. So you can't have an AI generate something for you and then say, this is my masterpiece. Nobody else can use this. So you should be mindful of those things, and there are definitely some things that, I'll be really honest, I'm just going to let the court sort out. It's bigger picture than what I'm doing. And obviously, there are some issues with what's called AI hallucination, where it will create content that doesn't actually exist. So if you say, hey, generate 10 great recommendations for YA fiction, it might make some of them up. So you need to be really aware that it is a limited technology. It's not perfect. So you really need to be mindful of what you're generating so that it is accurate, so that you know it is not full of errors and mistakes. But then there's the bigger issue of who owns the work. That's why I tend to only use it for things that I would have normally looked for samples on anyway that are readily available, like the things I've mentioned earlier.
What training or resources are necessary for librarians to effectively incorporate AI into their work?
Oh, that's an even better question because it's so new in libraries and sometimes we're not as good at staying on top of things. For example, I just hosted a session this morning on AI use in the library, and most of the people I've gotten feedback from was thank you for doing this because I cannot find any other, no one else is talking about this, and most of them were just scared of it. Because let's be honest, we all saw Terminator 2. So it's terrifying that a T-3000 is going to come through the door. Anyway, now I'll digress before I just start talking about Terminator 2. But the challenge is finding that training, fighting some of the misinformation about AI, which is interesting because one of the dangers of using AI is accidentally giving out misinformation. So it's growing. It's a new thing. I'd say I've only in just this year started to see training pop up around AI. So it's going to take a lot of initial investment from an organization to understand how can we use it, what can we use it for, and how do we safely use it.
How can AI be used to improve the overall user experience for library patrons?
Ooh, that's a good one. If you figure that one out, let me know. Because here's what I'm finding it does, and the way I use it. I've used it to save myself time on some of the tasks that I don't want to call them low priority because they're very important, but they're also very kind of in the box, basic functions, crafting policy, writing press releases, writing social media posts. Coming up with social media posts is a big one. I was just explaining to someone how I use ChatGPT. Summer reading earlier this year, I just said ChatGPT, create me 10 social media posts about summer reading program around this theme. And it gave me some great ones. It also likes to put some really cheesy emojis in there, so we have to take those out, but that's fine. I've actually started telling it without emojis, so it doesn't give me any. But it makes it simpler, especially on my staff, to save them time. And what we do at that time is build better connections with our patrons. We build better connections with our community. We're able to spend time getting a little bit outside of our walls and delivering better service because we're not spending 4 hours a day, well, not 4 hours a day, maybe 4 hours a week, figuring out what our social media posts are going to be. Those kinds of things.
Are there any potential pitfalls or limitations to using AI in libraries?
Oh, absolutely. There's absolutely limitations. One, it doesn't know everything. Just remember that. It does not know everything. I think they fixed this, but they actually had a flaw in ChatGPT specifically where it actually started using itself as a source for new results. So it was using past results. So eventually it's going to become this circular, almost incestuous information pit. Luckily, I think they did fix that so that that's no longer happening, but it's be mindful of what you're doing. Don't just trust that it gave you exactly truthful information. That's why I tend to use it for things that aren't, I'm not submitting anything for a Pulitzer that I'm getting. That's really a hyperbolic way of saying it, but yeah.
What are some examples of successful implementation of AI in libraries?
I think we've implemented it pretty well so far, but it's been mostly on my end and some of my staff's end of making some of our tasks easier. For example, we host a monthly trivia at a local sports bar, Walk-Ons in Starkville, Mississippi, and I will use it to generate trivia questions for me. And so what I actually do, because to be honest, the trivia questions it gives me are boring. They're really boring. I like really creatively worded trivia questions. But say, for example, next month we're doing trivia and it's all Star Wars themed. We're going to do 3 rounds, and each round is a different trilogy of the 9 movies. So first round's going to be episode 1 through 3, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'll do is I'll have it generate 100 questions, and I'll use those to inspire or to remind me of a thing to talk about and to create a question around. Like, it may give me a really boring question. What was the name of the blue and white droid that blah, 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 But it might make me think of, ooh, where did the name R2-D2 come from? And make that a trivia question.
How can AI be used to enhance research and data analysis in library settings?
I don't know. I'm just going to admit that I don't know if it's very helpful in the research aspect yet. I don't know. What I can tell you, in the data analysis side of things, it can be fed certain engines, not necessarily the ChatGPT engine, but there are some AI engines in there that you can feed massive amounts of data, and it can give you a synopsis analysis. So it can give you like this all-round version of it. I've heard of people feeding it all kinds of data to get, in the same way that people used to use like these massive spreadsheets and then put these formulas in that give them these fancy results. AI can take some of that away. Now it's still, the barrier to entry is still a little high. There's a high investment on the user end to become comfortable and to understand how it works. But I think as we see progression of the technology, there will be tools developed around very specific uses that are going to take some data analysis away. I could see it very much being used in analyzing circulation data in public libraries to understand what titles are checking out the most, what genres are checking out the most, who is our biggest age group of users. We can feed all of our circulation data into it and really get some useful information that we can use moving forward to make decisions.
What are some best practices for maintaining privacy and security when using AI in libraries?
So privacy and security is one of those serious questions. I just recommend not feeding it any sensitive data. Don't feed it names, don't feed it addresses, don't feed it phone numbers, don't feed it, like in the use case I was talking about where you can feed it circulation data, for example, and get some really useful feedback and insights. What you probably don't want to do is feed it your entire circulation history where you know who circulated what, who checked it out, who had it longest, who's our worst offenders at returning books on time. We can look that up later on our own. I think right now that's your best bet, is to just don't give it that information to work with, and therefore your concerns will be belayed just a little bit. But it is a real concern moving forward, how safe is the information we're giving it.
How can libraries work with AI developers and vendors to ensure that the technology is being used in a responsible and effective manner?
I think that would be a really interesting conversation to have with those that are developing these tools. There's a really famous quote from Jurassic Park where it says, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they never stopped to think whether or not they should. I really would love if people would consult with librarians about whether or not they should do something sometimes, because we could probably help them. I don't mean to be doom and gloom, but I think we're a little past being able to influence about it not being used for the wrong reasons and used for the wrong thing. I think it's really just up to us to make sure that our uses, and if we get the opportunity to work with AI developers, which I suspect we're going to get to as they start incorporating it more and more into things like our ILS and some of our analysis data that we use, we're going to get the opportunity to have input there, but we just have to make sure we're using it for the right reasons. And ultimately, I think that's our best case, is making sure that we are at least being the example to follow on safe use, very conscious use, making sure that we're not doing evil. Do no evil, as Google's slogan is. Whether you trust them to do that or not's on you.
And lastly, how would you rate these AI-generated questions on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best?
I think these questions have been pretty solid. I think there's some things that maybe we're not ready to ask yet. I don't think they're not valid questions. I just don't think we're necessarily at a place yet where we can answer exactly, for example, making sure it's being used for the right reasons, or how is it increasing patron service in our libraries, and those kinds of questions. We haven't answered those yet. So, but overall, I'd give it an 8. It's a good solid 8.
Anyways, that's going to be it for today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And anyways, that is going to be it for this bookish video.